They thought I was gone. They thought I would never see my own living room again. Yet here I am, sitting in my favorite armchair, my hands steady on the polished oak arms, my gaze fixed on the doorway where my son and his wife will soon appear. How does a woman, declared incapable and confined in a foreign hospital, return to the heart of her home without warning? That is the question hanging in the air, heavier than any accusation they have ever leveled against me. I want you to pause for a moment and consider this. Have you ever been so certain someone you loved was loyal only to find their loyalty bought and sold for money? It is a peculiar kind of betrayal, the kind that claws at your chest while leaving your mind racing with disbelief. Damon and Lenora, my own blood and my son's wife, orchestrated a journey I thought would end me. They imagined a world without me, a world where my fortune was theirs, unquestioned and unchallenged. They believed that by removing me, they could erase not just my influence, but the very legacy I had built. Let me start from the silence that preceded their arrival. The room is dim, yet familiar. The faint scent of aged leather and polished wood carries the comfort of decades. My armchair faces the windows that overlook Cedarwood Estates gardens, a domain I have curated for more than 40 years. Each leaf, each stone, a reflection of order and control I have exercised over my life and my business. Control, that word is crucial, because for the first time, I have it back in a way they will never expect. The calm before confrontation is a tool, and I wield it like a blade. Damon and Lenora believe the journey to Athalia erased me, that the red folders, forged papers, and falsified signatures had silenced Vivienne Sinclair. They have no idea that observation, patience, and quiet strategy have sharpened my awareness beyond what even they understand. You might ask, how could a person turn their fortune against you while maintaining a smiling face? That question is exactly what I want you to hold on to, because it is the thread that weaves through every calculated step they took and every step I planned in response. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to confront those who underestimated you, to face people who assumed your influence had evaporated overnight? It is a sensation that balances anger, anticipation, and a kind of satisfaction only those who have been wronged can truly understand. Now, let me guide you through the first layers of what they intended. Damon, the man who inherited more than 20 years of business acumen he never developed, has always floated on my reputation like a raft on a river. Lenora, with her careful composure and cold logic, perfected the art of subtle persuasion. Together, they built a case to declare me incapable, a plan that would leave Cedarwood open to liquidation and my personal wealth diverted elsewhere. They counted on every legal loophole, every local official they could sway to complete their scheme. But I learned the rules of their game before they realized I had noticed. I watched, I noted, and I waited. Every detail mattered. Every conversation, every hesitation, every glance that betrayed intent. And now, seated in the living room they assumed I would never reclaim, I feel a quiet power settle over me, a power rooted not in rage, but in precision. This is my space, my moment, and they have no idea what awaits them. I want you to think about the notion of vigilance. How often do we trust that those closest to us will act in our best interests? I want you to ask yourself, have you ever truly measured the intentions of someone who appears devoted but is quietly calculating? There is a lesson here about attention, about noticing the cracks in otherwise flawless performances. Damon and Lenora overlooked one detail, one human constant. I observe, I understand, and I act. And here is the uncomfortable truth. They thought I was powerless. They were convinced that by using distance, authority, and deceit, they could manipulate a situation to their advantage. They were wrong. They underestimated not just my resolve, but my understanding of strategy, human behavior, and the laws that protect those who take the time to anticipate threats. So, as I wait, the silence becomes an accomplice. It holds the tension in the room, sharp and poised, like a drawn bowstring, and I want you to lean in with me. Because the story you are about to hear is not merely one of revenge, it is a testament to awareness, to foresight, and to reclaiming control when those closest to you seek to diminish it. If you value being alert to deception, if the idea of standing strong against betrayal resonates, then I invite you to stay with me. There are lessons in this tale that go beyond family and fortune. They are lessons about recognition, about preparation, and about never underestimating the power of someone you believed was defeated. And now, the moment edges closer. The front door will open, and everything they assumed about this house, about me, and about the outcomes they orchestrated will be challenged. Their confidence, their smiles, their certainty, they are all about to meet the one variable they could not calculate. Vivienne Sinclair, awake, aware, and fully in control. The invitation arrived on a crisp spring morning, wrapped in the politest words Damon and Lenora could muster. They painted Ethalia as a haven of sunlit villas and gentle waves, a place to heal and reconnect. I should have declined immediately, yet curiosity, sharpened by years of navigating human deceit, compelled me to accept. When we arrived, the villa perched on a cliff revealed itself in full glory. White stone walls, balconies overlooking waters shifting from turquoise to deep cobalt, and terraces lined with fragrant orange trees. Every detail suggested comfort, indulgence, and care, but I knew better than to trust appearances alone. From the very first moment, Damon's attentiveness felt rehearsed. He opened doors with exaggerated courtesy, lingered just long enough to make me feel valued, and smiled in a way that suggested he was enjoying a performance only he understood. Lenora moved through the space with quiet authority, ensuring every glass was polished, every towel perfectly folded, every meal precisely plated. There was no warmth in their attention, only gestures meant to lull me into trust. I took careful note of their movements, the way Lenora's eyes occasionally flicked toward documents she carried, and how Damon's laughter sometimes sounded forced. During our first dinner, the Mediterranean flavors were abundant and fresh. Wine poured in crystal flutes. Damon leaned in, asking questions about my health, recent business meetings, and plans for Cedarwood. On the surface, it was concern. In reality, it was probing, testing for signs that could be used against me. Lenora's hand brushed mine at intervals, a gesture meant to comfort, yet I recognized it as calculated, monitoring my reactions. I allowed a quiet smile, playing along while recording every nuance in my mind. By the second day, subtle suggestions began to appear with more weight. Damon casually mentioned visiting specialists, framing it as interest in my well-being. Lenora spoke of succession planning and future-proofing the estate, her voice calm, measured. Their words were carefully chosen, almost imperceptible. They were planting ideas in my mind while claiming they came from concern. Every toast, every gesture carried an undercurrent of expectation. I could feel the gears turning behind the smiles. The villa, the sun, the gentle waves, they were distractions, a stage set for disorientation. And then it clicked, the quiet conversations Damon initiated with staff, Lenora's insistence on private family discussions, and their eagerness to have me taste local specialties. The pieces aligned. They were planning to convince outsiders I was unreliable, unfit to manage my affairs. I would not be merely manipulated. I was being prepared for confinement. Rather than panic, I sharpened my observation, every staff member's behavior, every document they slid across the table, every casual comment became data. I considered my options, mentally mapping escape routes and backup plans. noting where doors unlocked easily and where cameras might be placed. I could feel their confidence building, their certainty that I would be trapped in their web. Little did they know, the net they wove around me was transparent. I could see every strand. If you were in my position, would you have boarded that plane? Would you have smiled politely while watching those closest to you measure your reactions and intentions? Consider your choices. Because sometimes the most dangerous situations arrive wrapped in silk and sunlight. By the third evening, everything seemed effortless. A final toast on the terrace, laughter mingling with the sea breeze, the villa bathed in golden light. Yet I sensed the shift. A hidden plan was about to unfold, one that could determine not just my fortune, but my freedom. And when it did, nothing would be as it seemed. The third evening began with what appeared to be another simple toast on the villa's terrace. Lenora insisted she had learned a regional specialty, a cocktail meant to celebrate our time together. I took 2 careful sips, savoring the flavor, unaware of the chemicals hidden within. Minutes later, a fog crept into my mind, subtle at first, then overwhelming. The world tilted, my legs refused to obey, and speech became a strained effort. I tried to stand, to call out, but my voice was a thick, rasping echo of itself. Damon rushed to my side, his expression a mirror of exaggerated panic. "Mom, stop moving! You're breaking things!" he shouted, his voice carefully pitched for maximum effect. Lenora, composed and calculating, filmed the scene on her phone, capturing my disorientation as if it were proof of instability. I struggled against the haze, trying to gather my senses, but it was no use. Within hours, I found myself restrained in the back of a van, the taste of metal and bitter sedatives thick on my tongue. Damon and Lenora sat opposite me, faces stripped of any familiar warmth, replaced by a cold calculation that made my stomach twist. "Don't worry, Mum," Damon said, in a voice far too smooth to be sincere. "This is for your own good. You've been under stress," I rasped in disbelief. "Stress? You drugged me." Lenora's thin smile was all the reply I received. She held up a folder bound in red tape. "It's all taken care of. Dr. Costi in Athens signed the papers. Your mental decline, paranoia, and erratic financial decisions have all been documented." My blood ran cold. The documents were forged, yet terrifyingly convincing in a foreign legal system. They had spent months creating a narrative that could make me vanish behind official walls, a plan designed to strip me of agency and freedom. The van arrived at its destination, the Athalia Clinic for Acute Care. The building was a relic, grey and uninviting, its paint peeling, its windows dull and grim. It was nothing like the pristine hospitals I knew. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant mixed with neglect. Security personnel moved with mechanical precision, indifferent to human distress. When I was pulled from the van, I screamed, calling Damon's name, pleading for any hint of humanity. Lenora leaned close, her voice a whisper filled with cruel triumph. "Enjoy your stay. You're highly aggressive and a flight risk. By the time you leave, if you do, Cedarwood will be gone, and the money you plan to donate will fund our new life." Damon averted his eyes, silent, a shadow of the man I once knew. They handed the folder to a large, silent orderly and walked away, leaving me on the cold courtyard tiles. My body was shaking, but my mind hardened. Tears were unnecessary. This was no longer family drama. This was survival. And I swore the moment I stood there that their confidence in my defeat would cost them everything. Inside the hospital, my first days were a haze of potent sedatives and isolation. Doctors ignored my protests and my attempts at communication, referring only to the red folder that Lenora had provided. The papers described a woman incapable of rational thought, unfit to manage her affairs. The staff accepted them as gospel, indifferent to my protests. My reality had been replaced by a narrative crafted to erase me. I felt the walls closing in, the hours blending into one another, yet my mind refused to yield entirely. I refused to take the medications when possible, hiding pills in my sleeves, spitting them out when no one watched, forcing clarity to return. Observation became my lifeline. I watched the guards, noting routines and weaknesses. The staff were complacent, predictable in their corruption. My chance came in the form of Lysander, a young aide tasked with maintenance. His English was broken, but enough for careful communication. I approached him quietly, establishing trust with a promise. 10 times the amount Damon and Lenora paid him if he ensured I could document everything and escape the immediate confines. At first, fear held him back, but the offer was persuasive. Over 2 days, we exchanged messages, and I handed him the details of Mr. Sterling, my trusted attorney in Providence, including a single coded phrase: "The cedarwood shipment is compromised. Check the emergency filing in Trust 703. Lysander returned with copies of the admission paperwork. The documents revealed their full intent. They had prepared contracts for the sale of cedarwood, plans to move liquid assets into a shell corporation they controlled, and had fabricated my incapacity to secure signatures for their fraudulent transfers. Their betrayal was total, calculated, and immediate. I realized that they were not simply greedy, they were desperate, willing to erase me entirely to cover their debts and consolidate wealth. That knowledge fueled every decision I made in the following hours. The night of my escape was carefully timed. Lysander provided keys to a seldom-used utility exit and a small satchel of supplies. I moved with precision, each step silent, heart pounding but mind razor-sharp. We avoided the main corridors, slipping past sleeping guards. Once outside, the cold night air hit me like a shock. The streets of Athalia were quiet, empty, and unfamiliar, but freedom was more intoxicating than fear. A rented car waited, along with cash enough to survive until I could reach a safe point for travel across the continent. I thanked Lysander, promising a reward that would transform his life, and set my course toward a northern port, boarding a freighter under the cover of darkness. As the ship moved through black waters toward Italy, I allowed myself a rare smile. Damon and Lenora believed they had succeeded. They were preparing celebrations, calls to creditors, even arranging my supposed affairs back home. They had no idea that their plans were frozen by preemptive legal maneuvers, that their actions had set the stage for exposure and ruin. I had survived their trap, but the real reckoning awaited back in Newport, and when that moment came, their disbelief would be total. The first days in the clinic were disorienting, a haze of sedatives and enforced confinement that tested every ounce of resolve I possessed. My room was small, the paint peeling, the single window offering a view of nothing but a grey courtyard. Staff moved silently, barely acknowledging my presence, and the rules of the facility were strict and unyielding. Every attempt at protest or explanation was met with polite dismissal, as if my words carried no weight. It became clear quickly that the documents Lenora had provided were considered absolute. They were my chains. I was Vivienne Sinclair, corporate leader and matriarch, reduced to a number in a ledger, a patient whose mind was supposedly failing. Yet surrender was not an option. I refused most of the medication, careful to hide pills when orderlies were nearby, letting my mind regain its clarity, while my body endured the dull ache of withdrawal. Hours became exercises in observation. I learned the staff's schedules, the quiet corners where doors remained unlocked, the paths the guards took while performing their rounds. I catalogued patterns and weaknesses in my mind, turning every mundane routine into potential opportunities. The facility was poorly staffed and overly reliant on the fear of its patients. Its strength was only as rigid as the people who enforced it. Among the employees was Lysander, a young aide whose disinterest in the system was visible in the way he moved through his duties. His English was hesitant, broken, but sufficient. Over time, I began to speak to him, first with gentle questions, then with subtle observations that allowed him to see I was alert, aware, and determined. I did not beg. I did not plead. I offered clarity and purpose, an understanding that assisting me could change both our fates. It took patience, but over days we established trust. Written notes passed discreetly, quiet whispers during his cleaning rounds, small tests to measure loyalty and discretion. Each interaction was a careful negotiation, building a fragile but crucial alliance in the most unlikely of places. By the end of the first week, my mind had sharpened to its natural acuity. The haze of sedation had lifted enough to recognize the vulnerabilities of both staff and system. Lysander became more than an aide. He was my window into the outside world, the conduit through which I could begin to understand the full scope of Damon and Lenora's betrayal. Together, we exchanged observations and tentative plans, discussing security gaps and procedural oversights without ever leaving a trace of evidence for the administration. Isolation became a tool rather than a punishment. With no one to distract me, I could focus on strategy, analyzing the layout of the clinic, memorizing guard routines, and understanding where weaknesses might exist in the physical and procedural barriers designed to contain me. Each day, I practiced patience, endurance, and vigilance, knowing that my opportunity for escape would demand precision and timing. I observed the orderlies, noting which doors required keys, which alarms were frequently ignored, and how quickly staff would respond to disturbances. Every detail was another piece of the puzzle, stored carefully in the vault of my mind. The psychological pressure was relentless, but I reminded myself constantly of what was at stake: my freedom, my estate, and the truth of my life. This awareness fueled focus, turning fear into action-oriented clarity. I began to understand the depth of the corruption and complacency I could leverage. The staff's complacency, their reliance on documents over human judgment, made them predictable. Lysander's growing trust became my advantage. He was willing to take calculated risks, and I began to chart a path that would use both opportunity and timing to turn my imprisonment into a stepping stone toward control. How would anyone escape if every rule seemed absolute and every doorway led to another locked barrier? That question drove every decision I made. I envisioned multiple routes, tested small movements, and mapped the environment with a meticulous attention that came naturally to someone who had spent a lifetime navigating hostile negotiations and complex systems. Every whispered conversation with Lysander, every slip of paper exchanged, became a thread in a larger plan. Though the clinic attempted to reduce me to a passive figure, I remained alert, aware, and calculating. I reminded myself, often aloud, that we've all faced impossible odds in one form or another. My story was extraordinary, yes, but it was also a testament to human resilience, to the ability to adapt when faced with deliberate injustice. The days were long, measured in routines and enforced isolation. But each one brought me closer to the moment when patience, observation, and a secret alliance would combine to turn a prison into a path toward freedom. The night of my escape arrived quietly, without ceremony, under a sky dark enough to hide every movement. Lysander appeared at the appointed hour, calm and precise, carrying the keys to a seldom-used utility door I had memorized during endless hours of observation. Every step was deliberate, measured, a choreography of caution honed by years of negotiating hostile boardrooms. My body still ached from sedation, but my mind was clear, sharp, and singularly focused on freedom. We moved silently through the back corridors, avoiding the main hallways where staff might notice us. The sounds of the clinic were muted, only the occasional shuffle of a guard breaking the stillness. Each door opened with care, each corridor navigated without leaving a trace. Lysander provided directions to avoid security cameras and motion-sensitive lights. His quiet confidence steadied my nerves. This was not reckless action. This was precise, calculated timing. Every decision had consequences, and I had learned to weigh them all. Once outside, the cold night air struck me, a shock that felt like both liberation and reality converging. The streets of Aethalia were dark and unfamiliar, yet the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional streetlight offered reassurance. Lysander had secured a small rental car, and a modest bundle of local cash was tucked in the glove compartment for emergencies. We drove with care, avoiding major intersections and patrols, the city stretching ahead as a maze I had already visualized in my mind. Our journey was painstaking. I avoided airports, knowing Damon and Lenora would anticipate conventional routes. Instead, I navigated by train, ferry, and quiet roadways, always alert to the possibility of being tracked. The rhythm of travel became both a shield and a strategy. Each stop was brief, each interaction calculated. I maintained my cover with the ease of someone accustomed to managing crises under pressure. Every moment brought me closer to the first step of regaining what had been stolen. Communication with Mr. Sterling was the lifeline that kept my strategy grounded. Using a carefully concealed local phone, I relayed information through coded language. The Cedarwood shipment is compromised. Check the emergency filing in Trust 703. That phrase was enough to trigger pre-arranged legal maneuvers. Freezing of all liquid assets, temporary halting of property contracts, and protective orders that would render Damon and Lenora's plans inert. Their stolen fortune was trapped in place, untouchable, while I moved across the continent in pursuit of my own reckoning. Lysander proved invaluable beyond expectation. Each new obstacle, whether a checkpoint, an unfamiliar road, or the necessity of securing food and lodging, was met with steady guidance. He was cautious, yet committed, and I ensured he understood the stakes. Freedom required trust, and trust required clarity. I offered direction and assurance, never losing sight of the ultimate goal, a return to Newport where Damon and Lenora believed themselves victorious. As the days passed, my plan began to take form. I would not simply arrive unannounced. I would arrive with evidence and leverage that they could neither dispute nor ignore. Each leg of travel, each careful decision was a rehearsal for the final confrontation. The meticulous preparations of years managing Sinclair Global had trained me for negotiation, strategy, and psychological precision. Now, those same instincts guided a personal mission far more critical than any corporate deal. The risk was ever present. At every port, ferry, or rental office, I calculated contingencies, leaving false trails to protect our movements. Damon and Lenora believed I was incapacitated, lost in a foreign facility, subject to their manipulation. Every misstep on their part had been carefully documented. Every transfer of assets frozen, and every legal loophole accounted for. They had invested in their victory, yet in doing so, they had underestimated the one person who could turn their confidence into collapse. By the time we reached a safe point on the European mainland, I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection. The journey had been exhausting, physically and mentally, but it had also sharpened my determination. Damon and Lenora were counting on fear and absence to secure their gain, and yet I had turned invisibility into power. The seeds of their undoing were planted in every document secured, every account frozen, and every step taken along the path of discretion and patience. As I looked toward the Atlantic horizon, the next phase was clear. Return to Newport. Reclaim my home. and orchestrate a revelation so calculated that it would force acknowledgement of the betrayal, not in whispers or insinuations, but in undeniable truth. The villa in Athalia, the sedatives, the fake evaluations they had thought that was the end. They could not have been more wrong. They believed they had destroyed me, but they had only ensured that my comeback would be precise, unstoppable, and inescapable. Every step we had taken together, Lysander and I, every risk navigated, had brought me to the threshold of that confrontation. And when it came, Damon and Lenora would realize the full cost of underestimating a woman who had built an empire, survived treachery, and never surrendered her mind or resolve. If you think what comes next is justice or revenge, comment revenge below and prepare to see how the scales will be balanced. When I finally glimpsed the familiar silhouette of Cedarwood Estate, relief and anticipation surged in equal measure. The journey across Europe had been taxing, but every step had been necessary to ensure that I returned not as a victim, but as a force with control over every element Damon and Lenora had believed they commanded. Cedarwood's gates, tall and ornate, stood unchanged, as if waiting for the rightful owner to reclaim what had been nearly stolen. My first task was ensuring that the stolen fortune remained out of their reach. Mr. Sterling, my trusted attorney, had acted on the coded instructions I had relayed through Lysander. Every liquid asset was frozen, and the pre-sale agreements for Cedarwood Estate were suspended indefinitely. No wire transfer, no offshore account, no hastily signed contract could circumvent the protections we had put in place. Damon and Lenora had assumed momentum, believing that absence and manipulation guaranteed success. They were entirely unprepared for the legal fortress that now secured my position. Inside Cedarwood, I moved with deliberate care. Each hallway, each room reminded me of decades spent building not only wealth, but a home rooted in control and precision. I double-checked the arrangements for my guest, ensuring the environment was exact. Every chair, every document, every small detail of the living room was positioned to amplify impact. This was more than a reunion. It was the culmination of observation, planning, and patience. Damon and Lenora would confront reality not gradually, but all at once. The guest was already in place, though hidden from immediate view. Mr. Silas Thorne, an agent with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, had arrived quietly, briefed on the precise details of their financial maneuvering. Silas had reviewed every transaction, every attempted offshore diversion, and every irregularity in their attempt to claim what they had no right to. He was ready to act not only as an enforcer of the law, but as a silent witness to the culmination of my strategy. I took a slow walk through the main hall, visualizing their entry and the moment of confrontation. How would it feel to see those who had plotted my downfall stumble into a trap of their own making? To witness disbelief, panic, and frustration all at once? I allowed myself a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the focus required to maintain composure. Every detail mattered. The timing of their arrival, the positioning of the guest, and the readiness of the documents that rendered their plans meaningless. While arranging the final pieces, I reviewed every element of the evidence: the frozen accounts, the pre-sale suspension, the records of wire transfers to Athalia, and the fabricated psychiatric evaluations, all of it placed in clear view, but only at the perfect moment. Damon and Lenora had invested in their victory, yet they had ignored one fundamental principle: underestimating the resolve of a mother who had not only built an empire, but survived a betrayal intended to erase her. Curiosity and anticipation mingled with quiet triumph as I checked the final details with Silas. He understood the psychology as well as the law. Together, we ensured that when the moment arrived, the impact would be absolute. There would be no confusion, no denial, and no room for excuses. The weight of their actions, measured against the precision of justice and strategy, would confront them fully. As I stood in the main hall, I considered the question every viewer might ask themselves. How would it feel to return home after being abandoned and betrayed in a foreign land, after being declared powerless and erased by those you trusted most? The answer would be visible in the faces of Damon and Lenora, and I could hardly wait for that instant. Wait until they meet the guest. Wait until they realize that every move they had counted on, every step toward illegitimate gain, had been anticipated, neutralized, and set aside to maximize their reckoning. Cedarwood was more than a home now. It was a stage, and I was ready to take my rightful place at its center. The final act was nearly set in motion, and the silence of the estate held a promise of consequences long overdue. The day Damon and Lenora returned, the house seemed to hum with quiet expectation, though I alone knew the true rhythm of what was about to unfold. I had waited long enough, allowing them to assume I was helpless, absent, and entirely removed from the world they sought to control. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Cedarwood, highlighting the familiar lines of the estate I had built and preserved for decades. Every object, every piece of furniture, every detail was exactly as it had been, a silent testament to the life they attempted to erase. I settled into my favorite armchair in the living room, a seat I had claimed years ago as both a mother and a matriarch, a position of authority and observation. My silk robe draped around me, slightly rumpled from travel, but my posture was unyielding, commanding. The calm I projected was not fragile. It was absolute control, honed from years of running Sinclair Global and surviving battles far more complex than any domestic betrayal. My eyes rested on the door, ready to witness the culmination of my careful orchestration. The front door clicked open. Damon stepped in first, speaking loudly to the silence as if the house itself would greet him. "I can't believe this is finally over," he said, his voice smug with the certainty of victory. Lenora followed, tossing her designer bag onto the antique side table, her expression a blend of satisfaction and impatience. They had made calls to creditors, packed their personal belongings, and discussed the pre-sale of Cedarwood as if I were a distant memory, an obstacle already removed from the equation. Their footsteps echoed faintly as they moved deeper into the room. I raised a single hand, signaling for silence, the movement small but deliberate. Damon froze mid-step, his confident grin faltering when his eyes fell on me. Lenora's expression shifted immediately from composure to disbelief, her face draining of color, the carefully maintained mask of control cracking as reality intruded. "Mom?" Damon's voice cracked, a mix of confusion and panic. We thought. His sentence dissolved, replaced by a look I had seen countless times in boardrooms when plans collapsed unexpectedly. I allowed the moment to stretch, letting the weight of absence and assumed vulnerability press upon them. Then I nodded slightly toward the corner of the room. Silas Thorne, already reviewing documents with a precision that radiated authority, lifted his eyes to meet theirs. He was flanked by an agent in uniform, and together they formed a presence that made any pretense of victory vanish. "Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair." Silas's voice was calm, professional, and devastatingly exact. "I am Agent Thorne, IRS Criminal Investigations. We have a number of questions regarding wire transfers from your offshore company in Ethalia and the circumstances surrounding the abandonment of a U.S. citizen overseas. Preliminary evidence suggests multiple violations, including felony tax fraud and kidnapping." The room seemed to constrict around Damon and Lenora. I could see the rapid recalculations running across their faces, the flicker of disbelief, the first sparks of panic. Every document Silas had laid before them was a mirror reflecting the consequences of greed, of manipulation, and of the audacious attempt to claim what was never theirs. Lenora's hands trembled slightly as she reached toward the papers, unable to comprehend the legal weight now pressing against her. Damon, always accustomed to entitlement, faltered, searching for excuses, rationalizations, anything that could salvage the illusion of control. But there was none. The accounts were frozen, the pre-sale agreements suspended, and every wire transfer had been traced, recorded, and legally immobilized. Their empire of assumed advantage was suddenly revealed as a house of cards, teetering on the edge of collapse. I took a slow breath, letting the authority in my voice carry through the room. "Welcome home, children," I said, the soft tone a deliberate contrast to the severity of the situation. "I told you I was going on a trip. I just never said I was staying." The effect was immediate. Damon's jaw dropped, his hands clenching involuntarily. Lenora's eyes widened, disbelief giving way to panic, the mask of sophistication replaced by raw, unguarded terror. Every subtle manipulation, every lie, every effort to erase me was laid bare in a single moment of realization. I allowed myself a quiet satisfaction, watching as the weight of consequence settled on them. I had anticipated their reactions, timed the arrival of Silas, and structured every detail to maximize the psychological impact. Their confidence, their assumed victory, crumbled under the clarity of truth. Damon tried to speak, to protest, to regain some semblance of control, but his words faltered against the authority of law and evidence. Lenora's hands hovered over the documents, unsure where to begin or how to respond. Their panic was raw, genuine, and utterly irreversible. "You thought my absence made you powerful," I continued, voice steady, unwavering. "You assumed that taking me out of the equation meant I could no longer influence the outcome. You were wrong. Every step you took, every illegal maneuver has been documented, verified, and secured. Cedarwood, the assets. Everything you sought is untouched, protected, and now part of a legal process you cannot manipulate." The room was silent, but for the rustle of papers and the faint, tense breathing of Damon and Lenora. I could see them calculating, realizing that every move, every decision, every act of deception had brought them to a point where the law and my strategy intersected with perfect timing. The estate, the accounts, the pre-sale contracts, they were all beyond their reach, frozen in place until the consequences of their actions were fully addressed. Every element of my plan had been executed flawlessly. Lysander had provided the escape route, the coded communication with Mr. Sterling had secured the legal barriers, and Silas Thorne's presence ensured immediate enforcement. Damon and Lenora had believed themselves untouchable, yet here they were, confronted with the full measure of their overreach. As they absorbed the reality, I allowed a brief pause, letting the tension build, letting them confront the enormity of their failure. Then, with measured calm, I added, "Consider this a lesson in overconfidence and a reminder that underestimating a mother is always a mistake." The weight of realization finally broke through. Damon slumped slightly, the first admission of fear crossing his features. Lenora's lips parted in a silent gasp, the comprehension of consequences too large for words. In that living room, Cedarwood became not merely a home, but the stage of justice, precision, and inevitable reckoning. Subscribe now to see every twist of this plan unfold, because the story of betrayal, strategy, and the reclamation of power is far from over. The days that followed the confrontation were surreal, but in a way that confirmed the power of preparation and resolve. Damon and Lenora were immediately under investigation. The frozen accounts, the halted pre-sale of Cedarwood, and the detailed financial trail provided to Silas Thorne ensured that every move they had made was documented and actionable. I watched from my familiar chair as the ripple of consequences unfolded, a sense of calm replacing the tension that had gripped me for weeks. My estate, my wealth, and the legacy I had spent decades building were once again secure, and I could finally exhale. I walked through cedarwood, each room a reminder of both triumph and betrayal. The house carried its usual quiet dignity, the walls holding the echoes of years of careful management, celebrations, and the small victories that defined my life. And yet, those same walls had witnessed attempts to erase me, to claim what was never theirs. The contrast was a sharp, almost tangible lesson. Power without foresight is fragile, and even family is capable of deception when greed overshadows loyalty. My mornings returned to routine, but with a new layer of mindfulness. Every phone call, every letter, every request for access or information passed through layers of verification. I had reconnected with Mr. Sterling and Silas Thorne, ensuring that Cedarwood and all its holdings were fortified against any future encroachment. The process reminded me of the importance of vigilance. Even in spaces where trust had once felt absolute, Damon and Lenora, meanwhile, faced legal actions that stripped them of access to the wealth they had attempted to claim. The documents they had forged, the transfers they had orchestrated, and the attempts to commit me abroad were all now evidence against them. I did not take joy in the spectacle of their downfall, but I recognized the necessity of accountability. Some lessons are learned only when the consequences are undeniable, and I had ensured they would confront every one of theirs. In the quiet of my study, I reflected on the broader truths of this ordeal. Family, in its ideal form, is a source of love, guidance, and mutual respect. Yet, when trust is weaponized and greed dictates action, the most intimate relationships can become battlegrounds. The experience reinforced the importance of boundaries, clarity, and foresight. I had built an empire not simply to accumulate wealth, but to create security, opportunities, and impact. Protecting that vision required both sharp judgment and the willingness to act decisively when threatened. My reflections also extended to resilience. Being forced into a situation designed to strip away autonomy and dignity could have broken me, but preparation, awareness, and strategic alliances ensured otherwise. Lysander, Mr. Sterling, and Silas Thorne had each played a role, but the decision to refuse passive acceptance, to observe, and to act decisively was entirely mine. Strength is not always visible. It is often cultivated in silence, in the choices made when no one is watching. As I moved through my home, I restored small personal routines that had been interrupted. The morning tea by the sunlit windows, the careful organization of documents, and the simple pleasure of walking through the gardens I had planted decades ago. Each step was a reclamation of normalcy, but also a reaffirmation that life, even after betrayal, could be reclaimed with intention and focus. I also thought of viewers and those who might witness similar circumstances in their own lives. Betrayal is not always dramatic or extreme, but the principles remain the same. Awareness, documentation, and the readiness to act when trust is broken can prevent loss and restore control. The story of Damon and Lenora is an extreme example, yet it serves as a reminder that foresight and decisiveness are indispensable tools in navigating both personal and professional relationships. Still, I allowed myself a measure of quiet satisfaction. The confrontation had not been about spectacle. It had been about justice and restoration. My estate was intact, my voice had been heard, and the individuals who had attempted to exploit both had been stopped before irreversible harm could occur. Yet, the experience left a subtle, lingering lesson. Vigilance is never unnecessary, and the capacity for deception can emerge where least expected. I ended each evening with a sense of accomplishment tempered by reflection. Cedarwood stood as both home and symbol, a place of restored order, and a reminder that life is best navigated with a mixture of caution, strategy, and courage. Damon and Lenora would face the consequences of their actions, but I moved forward unburdened, aware that the true measure of strength lies in preparedness and integrity. To those listening, I offer this final thought. We all encounter betrayal in various forms, sometimes subtle, sometimes dramatic. The key is to act with clarity, to protect what is yours with decisiveness, and to recognize that foresight can turn even the most desperate circumstances into opportunities for reclaiming control. Strength and vigilance are not merely reactions, they are choices cultivated over time, ready to be exercised when the moment demands. Like, share, and comment if you believe justice was served and Vivienne's foresight ensured the balance was restored. Let her story remind us all that even in the face of betrayal, strategy, courage, and calm resolve can reclaim what is rightfully ours.